Last but not the least, I am excited to introduce our conference final session, which is very interesting. An open debate on artificial general intelligence. There are so many debates recently on the future of AGI, whether AGI is sentient, whether we need an AI coming with a purpose, when can we crack AGI, etc. Let this question be answered by our incredible speakers today. Last month, when we announced that there would be an open debate on the future of AGI at the Worldwide AI webinar, there were so many tweets on this issue. So I'm excited to finally open this panel discussion. The panel is joined by Patrick Bangert, VP of AI at Samsung SDS, Professor Fabio Cuzzolin, Professor of AI and Director of Visual AI Lab at Oxford University, David Dollen, former Head of AI at Volkswagen, Noelle Silver, Founder of AI Leadership Institute, an AI Executive at IBM, MVP of AI at Microsoft, Shirsha Chaudhuri, Director of Engineering, Thomson Reuters Labs, Thomson Reuters, David Churbuck, Founder, former Editor of Forbes.com, will moderate the panel discussion. David, over to you.
Hi, and good afternoon. My name is David Churbuck, and it's my honor to moderate the final panel discussion of this two-day agenda. I've been a tech journalist for most of my career. I've been writing about artificial intelligence since the early 1980s for magazines like PC Week, PC Computing, and Forbes. It's an honor to welcome you to this discussion of the very timely topic of artificial general intelligence. That's a term that Wikipedia defines as the ability of an intelligent agent to understand or learn any intellectual task that a human being can. Essentially an AI that achieves what some have called sentience and what Hollywood has called Skynet. But rather than talk myself into a corner, trying to explain something I know very little about but hope to learn, let's turn to the experts to hear their thoughts. We're going to cover a half dozen topics of interest over the next 30 minutes, and then turn it over to you in the audience for your comments and your questions. So let's get started, and I'll introduce our panelists. They are Noelle Silver-Russell. She's the founder of the AI Leadership Institute, and her experience in artificial intelligence includes one of the best-known consumer AI-powered devices, the Alexa. She has worked on AI projects at Microsoft and today is working on AI developments at IBM. David Vandalen is the former head of AI at Volkswagen North America and is now the vice president of data science at Grid Matrix. Fabio Cuzzolin is a professor and the director of the Visual Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at Oxford's Brookes University. Patrick Bangert is the vice president of artificial intelligence, data science, machine learning, and data analytics at Samsung Data Systems. Andreas Welch is a VP at SAP, focused on the application of artificial intelligence on process automation and across the enterprise. He edits and writes a newsletter, The Memo, that addresses the challenges of implementing AI in contemporary enterprise. And finally, Shirsha Chaudhuri is the Director of Engineering at Thomson Reuters, the TR Labs based in Bangalore, India. Previously, she was a Senior Program Manager of Big Data and Analytics at the Mercedes-Benz Research and Development Center. So welcome to all of you, and please feel free to jump in to these topics at any point if you have something to contribute. But let's begin by trying to get to the real meaning of artificial general intelligence. Does a true AGI need to be conscious and act like a typical human, or does a true AGI have to develop its own purpose on its own? David, Vandalen, Patrick, would one of you like to comment on this one?
Sure. I'll give the floor to Patrick if he'd like to go, and I can add some comments, or I'm more than willing to take a stab at the question. I'm sorry, Patrick. I think you might still be on mute. So I'll just
Sorry
jump
about
in.
that.
Go for it.
So the meaning of artificial general intelligence, I think for most people, is that the AI has acquired skill sets comparable to that of a human being. Now, by that, we don't mean skill sets in any particular area, but all of them, right? So if you think a human being can talk, drive a car, look at road signs and see the advertisement, think that this washing machine is cool and knows what it's being used for, et cetera, all these life skills, the person has knowledge about the world, how the world works, and all of these things combined into one single AI model would represent general intelligence. Does that make it conscious? Not necessarily, and that I think depends on what you mean by conscience. I'm a practicing Buddhist, for example. We have a certain understanding of what conscience means. I think neuroscientists have a very different one. So that would depend. Is it sentient? That again is another question. But I think what people are really interested in is whether this thing is harmful. And Hollywood movies like The Terminator address that very pointedly. My personal opinion is that it's a very nice concept to talk about general intelligence, but we are so far away from having it that it's hardly even worth discussing how to get there or what it would mean. It's a nice dream for media, but that's really all it is. What we have today is narrow AI.
Yeah, so I would say I'm in alignment with Patrick's views to a certain extent, that I also believe that what we're working with today is mainly what they consider narrow AI. The AI community has terms for strong and weak AI. They were basically given by John Searle, who formulated the strong and weak AI hypothesis, and also formulated a thought experiment called the Chinese Room experiment, which essentially showed that a digital computer executing a program cannot have a mind and mental states. And similar arguments have been made throughout history. And there's rebuttals to that argument as well. So I think this question kind of opens up a lot of pretext into like philosophy of mind, and kind of speaks to our humankind's like relationship with artificial intelligence as well. As Russell and Norvig say in their book, most AI researchers take the weak AI hypothesis for granted and don't really care about the strong AI hypothesis. My final take on it is like, we don't have enough answers around human sentience to really define what sentience means for a strong AI. And I think, however, as we endeavor towards a artificial general intelligence, we can create systems that augment human intelligence with weak AI, right? And I think the really interesting follow-up question to that is like, how are weak AIs augmenting human intelligence today, for what tasks and for what outcomes, right? So that is kind of my take on it.
Any other panelists have as dour a view as Patrick, that we're a long way?
Yeah, I'll say something, and then we'll go on to maybe the next one. I don't know. I feel like Fabio is going to jump in there. But general, I have a different perspective because I often think about it from the perspective of the user. And I was raised on the golden age of science fiction. Arthur C. Clarke is one of my favorite authors. And I remember him saying, and I never get this quote right, but I understand the essence of it because it's how my work at Amazon Alexa really took off, which was, to my users. And what Arthur C. Clarke says is that technology, or artificial intelligence in my world, right, it's indistinguishable from magic to people. And I kind of think of AGI the same way, that it might be to my user, to my dad, to my son, that they are talking to an AGI because it will seem to them to be this all-knowing assistant, this all-knowing, bud in their ear, like in the movie Her, right? Like this all-knowing thing. But the reality is, to your point, Patrick, it's not one model that knows all the things. And even that one model is even owned by one company. It's hundreds of thousands of intelligent agents working together. And I do see a world where that's possible. I actually do see a world. It's hard to see because of the silos that we work in today, the way that technology is built, and the kind of fiefdoms and walls we put up between teams and systems and brands. But I do see that is possible, right? As I started building more complex experiences for Amazon Alexa, I realized like I could call on a travel agent assistant. I could call on a banking assistant. I could call on a ordering food assistant, all within the context of a single persona. And to me, as the user, I could see that perception of AGI being true. Like it's indistinguishable from AGI to me. And so I see it from a different perspective. I definitely don't see a one model to rule them all. Nothing good comes from those things. But I do see the perception of that being real for people, that contextual understanding that gives me access to any intelligent agent on the planet that can serve my needs in the context and time frame that I need it. I don't think we're a lifetime away from that type of interaction.
Well, let's move on to the next question. And this goes to Patrick's assessment that we're a long way from ever achieving this. But what does the rest of the panel think are the hurdles, at least technically, or the obstacles that would have to get cleared for this to even be practically available?
Well, one of the main obstacles is really knowledge of the world. So if you take a standard chatbot with the most advanced language models, the GPT-X family of models, if you have a casual chat with it, like how you're feeling and things like that, the outputs are perfect. But if you ask it pointed questions that require knowledge of arithmetic, that require knowledge of relative size and weight and gravity and how the world works, and that certain things are food and others are not, it fails miserably. Like it is absolutely worse than even the youngest child that can communicate with you. And so I think that's really where the next step is, right? It's the next obstacle. It's certainly not the final obstacle, but it's the next one to somehow marry up the logical reasoning version of artificial intelligence and the neural networks parameter-based learning of artificial intelligence to be in some sort of coherent form that we have both the conversational ability and logic.
Got it.
If I may add to this one, I totally agree with Patrick that we are very long way from AGI in any form. I mean, first of all, we should have a proper definition, I think. I'm a scientist and I feel uncomfortable talking about things there's no definition for. And right now where we stand, we don't even have an agreed definition of what AGI. Yes, we have some vague assertions, but the first step would be to formalize the concept and the problem, and then maybe we would have a clearer idea what are the steps necessary to get there. And same with consciousness. So we talked about consciousness, but I don't think there is an agreed, there's a consensus in science as to what consciousness really is or means. So I would refrain, personally, I would refrain from talking about things we are not even able to define. So that's something I find quite annoying in some Twitter debates or the like. In terms of obstacles, I also agree with Patrick that word knowledge, word understanding is the biggest one. But I can see in principle that it can be done. It does involve quite a lot of very difficult problems. For instance, one thing I'm really keen on is moving from constant optimization. Machine learning is based on solving optimization problems, and right now these are defined in constant terms. Whereas you can argue that humans at least evolve over time, and also the problems that they want to solve evolve over time. So at the very least, they will need a time-variant formulation of machine learning to be able to mimic that kind of evolving intelligence that characterizes humans.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion of the Turing test, and there are various tests that can be applied to AI. But say something emerges that is claimed to be consciousness, what would be the tests that would need to be passed to fool someone? I guess it is an AGI just is it a technology that fools us into believing, as in the Turing test, that there's a real human on the other making responses? Is that really all it comes down to, or is it some self-replicating system that can, constantly optimize itself and ingest new material to add to its skill set to get towards where Patrick is saying, capture all knowledge or all capabilities?
Well, so the Turing test, of course, says that, if a person has a conversation with an entity for a little while, I think it was half an hour or so, and at the end of that conversation, the person cannot tell whether he's spoken to an AI or another human being, then the Turing test is passed, right? So currently, no model has passed such a test, at least if you bring the conversation around to these ordinary everyday topics. But if you're asking what kind of test would the AGI have to pass, personally, to put a point on it, I would say a university entry exam. Because that would involve knowledge of a multitude of different subjects, right? Knowledge of perhaps 2 or 3 different languages, knowledge of history, knowledge of physics and chemistry, knowledge of sociology, knowledge of mathematics, all these various things. It would have to do that in the everyday context of a high school graduating student, right? They would have to speak and listen and understand and write something on paper, things of all these different types of skills. Maybe you want to add a driving test for a car to that as well. That will give you the full scope of kind of human capabilities that entity would have to have.
All right, that's a good answer. Thank you.
I have a slightly different take to that. I mean, we're coming from the point of view of where the model is, but where the state of, our state of the art is today. I, however, feel that, how about we change the scale to what we expect when we hear the term AGI, right? And, I've kind of bucketed how would I test that we are truly there with respect to AGI in 2 ways. Right. There's this one test, I think, which kind of is something that I've built up reading this, I think, a report from McKinsey some years back, which says that, how will we know that AI is really working is when the system has the language of a 4-year-old, has the object recognition skills of a 2-year-old, the dexterity of a 6-year-old, the social skills of a 8-year-old, right? So that's your, even an initial step before you even, go to sociology and like a university grade test. That's one way of sort of measuring, are we there yet with respect to AGI? There's also the other little more scientific and methodical way of perhaps defining, as Professor Fabio was mentioning, could we perhaps consider it this way, that there are 4 parameters which could probably be used to create a sort of benchmark for tests that then lets us grade, is the system truly, is this agent an agent of AGI, right? Mm-hmm. And that goes back to concepts stemming from the item response theory, where you're looking at the problem itself, which is given to the system. Is that problem requiring the ability, which is the difficulty of the problem, right? Or is it going to be looking at, how the problem is able to discriminate and address a solution to the problem given to it. So these are two aspects with respect to the problem, but you'd also want the agent to have the ability evolve to solve different grades of problem, which is again, going back to the weak and strong and not narrow, right? And added to which, of course, you'd want that agent to consistently solve problems of different grades. Right. So these are these 4 dimensions, which perhaps we could define scientifically and say, this is how I want to, see if you're there yet or not with AGI.
Very good points. Thank you.
If I may chip in very, very quickly, I mean, I know we have a little time, but I feel very, very strongly about the Turing test. Things like GPT-3 which are just a glorified lookup table, basically, and can almost solve it. So, I really feel versatility is the key word here. And I think, like Shirsha said just now, a real test of general intelligence should go much, much beyond that.
Right.
I mean, you can think of a supernuminal bird learning to associate one object with another one, able to have a conversation that can pass the Turing test. So that's another point. We also need to come up with new tests that really measure intelligence in some accepted way.
Does emotion or the display of emotion play a role in sort of the benchmark, in your opinion, Shirsha?
Absolutely. I think that's one of those fundamental outcomes of having built up an understanding over contexts, right? Going back to what Patrick was describing as a sequence, right? So you have an understanding of a sentence, but could you build an understanding of a context over multiple sentences? And that understanding leads to how you want to react and interpret the world around you. So that goes back to your social and emotional gestures. And I think that's very critical to testing whether we've reached AGI or not.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about the steps that are needed for an AGI to become applicable commercially. What type of enterprise use cases could be helped or transformed by an AGI or something approaching its capabilities? Can you conceive of an application for a system that meets an AGI definition, and how much effort should research be applied to finding such a system? Anyone? Patrick, Shirsha?
Well, so let's start with the narrow AI, right? Narrow AIs are what we have today, and they, of course, meet multiple commercial success criteria. They make money by doing something very, very specific. If we had an AGI, by its very definition, it would have capabilities similar to ours. In other words, by very definition, it would be capable of doing all the jobs that we can do. And that puts us out of business as humanity. That doesn't necessarily mean that this AGI is malicious or will take over the world like it does in Hollywood movies, but it could. And at that point, you have to ask yourself, what are humans going to do if all of the essential and important activities to keep everything running can now be done by machines, right? So that the utopian view is that humans can now become, artists and poets and things like that, because everything important and essential about running the world is taken care of by the AGI. That's beautiful. Of course, there's the dystopian view that you can see in Hollywood. But my point is that if you do have AGI, every commercial use case is now solved.
Right.
I also want to add layer to that. I mean, yes, while I think it's really worth it to think of making investments in this field from, the commercial glory that this is going to lead to, but I really do think it's going to make significant impact in a more social way, right? In a more society impacting way. What I mean by that is, think of the system which can actually help you with all these human-like activities. Imagine what such a support system could do for people with disabilities. I've heard of systems which could augment, let's say, the blind, let's say, people who have trouble understanding the social dynamics. So this could definitely augment and create a more inclusive world for them, likely. And I also imagine that such a system is going to be immensely useful in the field of elderly care, some sort of a domestic support or a housekeeping agent. And of course, generated art and music to go with it. Why not? Right. But even if I, set aside these really needful situations that we have today, imagine somebody who could just run your the housekeeping of a social environment, right? Let's say an office or even a home where you need to see the situation around you and detect what needs to be done, which is what we do when we are kind of maintaining our house, right? So let's say the light's not working, we need to fix the light. So that's sort of an interpretation. You could see that, and if you have a system which takes care of these things for you, how useful that might be.
Absolutely. Is obsolescence and loss of one's livelihood a big driver of the sort of Skynet fear? I know that there's another rule or a test of sorts. I think it's called the Nilsson Test that says that basically an AI is sentient when it takes your job away. I know that the technology has been created to produce earnings report stories or sports stories, and even in the medical professions, medical devices have put certain specialties, taken away their livelihoods to some extent. Does anyone want to discuss that element?
Have you ever read Rossum's Universal Robots? It's a novel by Chapek where the word robot comes from, and that was about inventing a race of biological robots. Basically, they look like humans. They could do all the things that humans could do, and without many of the limitations. And it didn't end well, I have to say. So it is, It did show that all commercial applications were solved by that solution, as Patrick just said. But the side effects were not good. So if you haven't, I advise you read it.
I would love to.
So, I mean, the problem is that if AI removes some jobs but not others, you have a kind of a two-class society, right? You're left with people who do have jobs because their field has not yet been taken over, and other people who don't have jobs. If we have AGI and nobody has a job, then it's a different story, because now you can revolutionize the economy overall, right? You could make sure that everybody has a universal basic income, which is being discussed anyway. And once you have that, if everybody is completely assured of having a relatively nice life without having to do any physical labor for it, then you do have the possibility of having some pretty utopian and beautiful visions of the future. So it's not necessarily the same as a dystopia or a kind of Terminator world.
I'm going to turn to the questions. We've got quite a few, and I thought we'd open it up. I'm going to just start from the top. This is from Michael. Excuse my reading glasses. Michael Sheen Peralta. Since conversational AI can understand human intent, decode different languages, and respond in a way that is similar to humans, do you think it might contribute to identifying harmful and emergency situations that people can prevent or manage in effect? How do you see its future feasibility?
Okay, I'll take that one.
Okay.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. As a matter of fact, multiple times I was thinking about the evolution of conversational AI, the evolution of transformers, and the work that I mean, we're just at the beginning of this, right? This paper that transformed the way that these models are being built was written in 2017. Like, it just happened. So when we talk about and make some assessments about the future of AI, of what AGI can do, I always feel like we underestimate a bit what's going to be possible. I always tell people we underestimate what we can do, in 10 years time, but we often overestimate what we'll do like in the next 6 months. And this is similar to that. One of the things about conversational AI now is this concept of attention. Something that will get us closer to an AGI-like behavior is having a model that knows what we said yesterday, that knows what we said last week, 2 years ago. And that's that human behavior, part of the metrics I think that are so important to calculate and measure as part of like, is this really sentient? Is how, not only, of course, do you have that cognitive memory, but how are you using those memories to affect the neural network of decisions that are being made? And how is the lineage of those decisions being tracked? I actually think, Patrick, you mentioned something really important in my mind around, the important and necessary work. That's what AGI would end up taking over. But I remember seeing this. I've been in this industry like 20 years. We've gone through this before with other levels of automation. And someone always has to make the decision on what we think is important, right? What work we choose to enable these systems to actually do. And so I believe in that. Like, I believe that that's true. Someone has to make that decision. But I recently was reading the paper released by some Google researchers on how using reinforcement learning and DRLs and these new models that we're building that can synthesize their own data and now build their own cheat codes to pass reinforcement models test so that they get rewarded. That's really interesting to me, right? Because now we're building a model that's so powerful that it can actually detect what we think what it thinks we want it to do and write a cheat code to get its reward without ever actually doing the thing that it was supposed to do. And that, when we start thinking about AGI and Skynet, right? Those are the types of things. Like my first question that came to mind in the last question you asked was, why would we want to do this, right? We can clone dinosaurs, but why again? Like, do we want to do this work? But so many really interesting points. But when it comes to conversational AI, I think that attention piece is a critical part of that. Like, how are we able to hold memory of context over longer and longer spans of time? It's one of the reasons why GPT-3, BERT, right? They failed because they could only remember what you heard in that existing session and that context. We want to be able to talk to an AGI and it remember the household, cultural benefits of our family that we set and established 10 years ago. How do we test for that? How do we build AI that's able to hold that in memory and prioritize what memories are worth keeping, which ones are, do we let go? I think that's a lot of that conversational evolution.
But does, if I can intervene, does an AGI need to have human-like intelligence? I mean, in principle, we're certainly not the only kind of intelligence possible. So in principle, it could evolve in a completely different direction. I'm all in favor of human-centric intelligence, and most of my work is about that. So, and I think there's a lot to learn from human intelligence. But it's a very definite possibility that AGI might evolve in a completely different direction, with much less use of attention. For instance, you were stressing attention a lot. Does a future AGI necessarily need to have use attention that much? Not so sure. And another point that you were making I found very interesting is uncertainty. And I gave a talk on epistemic uncertainty this morning, which is my job basically. And the point of that is that making predictions in the very long term or even the medium term is incredibly complicated. And I hear a lot of prediction nowadays, and a very confident prediction as such, like you're gonna have AGI in 5 years or in 7 years or in 2036. And I think, what is this about? Do you understand the level of complexity of predicting the future of the entire world or even a scientific field? So I found that very unscientific, to be honest.
But AGI aside, just the description of this use case that Michael brings up here to detect anxiety is perhaps not so wide. It's fairly narrow, and it's coming from profiling a particular user's behavior, and it sort of seems feasible to me. not so distant future even. And in fact, I would imagine that this is going to have widespread commercial use cases, right? When you're trying to reach the customer support, and imagine if you're directed to the right agent because you're having a particularly nasty situation. Nothing like what that can do for your customer experience. So I truly believe this.
Well, I mean, yeah. So to your point, this is happening now. Like we definitely, that solution does exist. The narrow version of this solution exists. I think my understanding of his question was more like how broad can, like if somebody's having a mental health issue and we sense it in a conversation about insurance, right? Can we do something about that? If we know someone's having suicidal tendencies based on detections of voice patterns, but they're talking to their bank, like, that was how I kind of pictured it. But yeah, I 100% agree with you. This is hugely commercially valuable right now. And we are building this in a narrow way for many, many companies in their digital contact centers right now.
So here's a provocative question from someone in the audience, Philip Maharas. What can AI comprehend that human beings can't?
Well, I think that ties back to the first question. I mean, even to detect anxiety and to interpret expressions, I think humans struggle. I mean, I struggle to do that with my teenage son. So I can imagine that, perhaps a machine could be trained to do this more consistently, for sure.
I'd like to add on, because I work on machine theory of mind. I have a project on machine theory of mind, and so the idea that the machine can learn to understand the thinking and reasoning process of another agent, including a person, and it's incredibly difficult to do. I know DeepMind has produced a couple of papers on something they call TomNet that does that to a very very limited extent. But there isn't even a formal definition of that concept. And I'm going back to my previous point that before we start throwing stuff at problems, we should maybe spend a little bit time defining them formally.
So the question asked for comprehension, and I'm not even sure if we have a good understanding of what comprehension even means in an AI context. Shirsha points out that they can do it more consistently than humans. That's for sure true. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a software program, right? It's going to keep doing the same thing, and therefore it's going to be way more consistent than me. And in many applications, it's going to be much more accurate than humans in these narrow applications. But does that mean it's comprehended the task, or it simply learned it to the point where it's really good at it? That's a tricky thing.
Right.
That's the thing. I mean, that's what AGI means. It means like giving the sensation that they understand, right? That's the very point that we're discussing here.
Yeah, I would just add, if we think of AI agents, as mathematical models of optimization, and as human beings, we're building these models and we're optimizing behaviors so that they become more convincing to us and more convincing over time. Are we losing our ability to test what that actually is, right? Like, how do we actually define those tests to begin with, and how do we? To me, I don't even know. I would agree with Fabio to a certain extent. Like, we don't have a clear enough definition around like what our own consciousness is and how we can define it, and to try and define that in a machine is a real challenge. What I would kind of think about are, I get back to the point of weak AIs. We already live in a world where human intelligence is augmented by weak AI. The example I would give would be Google search, maps we use for routing, planning, credit scoring, mortgage applications, even dating apps, right? Have machine learning or AI components to them, and are affecting humankind in ways through today, right? And so I think the thing I would like to think about and have people walk away from this conversation thinking about is like, I know the worry and concern about artificial and general intelligence from humans is real. But to me, like, what's an interesting question to look at is like, how are weak AIs being used on a massive scale, and what are going to be the ultimate effects that they have on humankind, right? Like, I think that's a real situation that we're looking at today versus, you know, we could get into all kinds of philosophical debates on human consciousness and how to measure that in a machine. But like, to me, that's a more interesting thing to look at.
I think we're drawing pretty close to the end of our time. Any last thoughts that anyone wants to offer before we conclude? If not, I'd like to thank you all. It's been a pleasure getting to know you as we prepared for this, and also just hearing your very very well-informed opinions and insights into an area with a lot of uncertainty, a lot of misunderstanding, but huge, almost a golden age in terms of its current advances and impacts. But thank you all very much. I do appreciate your taking the time, and it's been a privilege to work with you.
You as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Same here.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.